Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 17th of April of 2025. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. You know that summarizing everything that took place today during the 17th of April of 2025, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians launched their major offensive operation. And the results and the progress that the Russians have shown us today, I can't even tell you when exactly did we see something similar or something like this. The Russians managed to improve their positions along the entire line of combat contact, starting from the Zaporozhye direction, this is very important, and ending in the vicinity of the city by the name of Sumo. So let's start from the beginning and let's start discussing everything in details. And first, let's talk about the city of Paris from about the France, because probably this is the main reason why the Russians launched their offensive operation exactly today. Zelensky's office chief Yermak, Ukrainian foreign and defense ministers arrived in Paris for talks with the US and Europe on peace and security guarantees. A meeting with US representatives is planned, as well as a series of talks with the coalition of the willing and countries ready to provide Ukraine with security guarantees. We're talking about France, Germany and Britain. Earlier it was reported that Rubio and Witkov would arrive in France as well. So we see that currently very important talks are taking place on the territory of France, where Ukrainians are trying to get some security guarantees, probably to end and to finish the war with the Russians. But you know that when talking about the line of combat contact, and once again when talking about the results that were shown by the Russians today, I'm not even sure that just security guarantees are enough for the Ukrainians. So let's start and let's talk first of all about the city of Kherson and the Kherson direction. The Russian sources published this video where we can see how the Russians attacked the central part of the city of Kherson with the use of 4 FAB bombs. As you can see, there were very heavy explosions, and the most important, there was a secondary detonation. Most likely the Russians destroyed maybe some warehouse or maybe some headquarters. As for now, we still haven't received anything from Ukrainian side, any comments. The only thing we had is that they published this video and reported that the Russians attacked civilians. Now let's discuss probably the most important and the most interesting updates. We are talking about the Orikhiv direction. The Russians today launched their offensive operation, and probably that was the biggest offensive operation ever carried out by the Russians since the beginning of the special military operation. And the most important, we have some changes on the ground. So let's discuss this offensive operation in details, and this is exactly the video we are talking about. Today the Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how the Russians were attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, how the Russians were maneuvering, how the Russians were attacking, then the Russians stopping, then the Russians were returning back, how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russians with the use of the significant number of drones, artillery systems and many other things. That was obviously the biggest offensive operation ever. And for example, this evening Zelensky made his own statement, not just regarding this offensive operation but also regarding Russian offensive operation in the Pakovsk direction, and he stated that the Russians used hundreds of soldiers and tens of vehicles. Anyway, this video was published by the Ukrainian side, so of course we will not see significant progress, even if the significant progress took place, but we have some changes on the ground, because according to this video, one of the episodes was geolocated, and this episode was geolocated exactly in this point in the southeastern part of the city of Takmachka. Furthermore, another episode was geolocated exactly in this point, and the Russians were trying to attack in the northern direction. So when talking about this video, we see that the Russians attacked at least using 3 directions. The first one took place, let's say, from the mainland towards the settlement, towards the city of Takmachka, and the second road of attack took place to the north of the village of Rabotina, or from the ruins of the village of Rabotina in the direction of the settlement by the name of Novodanilovka. Novodanilivka. As for this offensive operation, we can't say for sure whether the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take, let's say, or to get the southern outskirts of the settlement or not. But when talking about the settlement of Takmachka, indeed the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to take under control some positions. As for now, we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to move further or whether the Russians were, let's say, defeated and were forced to fall back. We can't say for sure. But one thing we see is that the Russians begin their offensive operation, their major offensive operation in the Orikhiv direction, with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. Furthermore, we receive lots of updates from the fields between the settlements of Nestyryanka, Koopins, Rabotina, Novodanilovka, Novoandreevka, and Orikhiv itself. If we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of this month, we're going to see lots of icons that are coming exactly from this territory. So we see that during the previous months, the Russians were over-focused in this direction with the purpose to clear this territory from Ukrainian trenches and strongholds, to destroy as many as possible Ukrainian temporary deployment points and strongholds and trenches and so on, with the purpose to ease the Russian progress in the northern direction. So we expect that in the very near future, most likely and probably during the next 48 hours, the Russians will launch another offensive operation with the purpose to attack the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the triangle, inside of the triangle between the settlements of Novoandreevka, Orikhiv itself, and the settlement of Novodanilovka. Furthermore, we expect that the Russians are planning to intensify their activities on the territory of the settlement by the name of Kamenska, because during the previous 24 hours we received a lot of videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of this settlement as well. A lot of videos how the Russians were bombing with this village with multiple launch rocket systems, how the Russians were bombing this settlement with FABs. So a lots of explosions, a lots of actions, and we see that the Russians are going to do something in this direction as well. Furthermore, to the north of the settlement of Stepoa, the Russian drones are working, trying to search and to destroy the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. I'll remind you that during the previous months we got lots of updates that the Russians managed to concentrate on this direction, more than 70,000 soldiers, and maybe this is the beginning of the major offensive operation, and maybe the Russians are planning to establish control over these territories. And if the Russians are able to take under control this, let's say, Rabotina, Zaporozhye, Orikhiv direction, then this is going to be something like complete collapse of Ukrainian defense on the way to the settlement of Zaporozhye. And as you can see, this Russian offensive operation started exactly during these talks and during these meetings on the territory of France, where Ukrainians are trying to get some security guarantees from the Western countries, maybe in exchange for peaceful settlement and probably capitulation and, let's say, adopting or approving the, let's say, request and demands of the Russian side. So it's very difficult to understand, but we see that the Russians have some tasks and they're planning to finish them, to complete them. Now let's move further. And let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. And the most important video is coming from the settlement of Dnieproenergia. And here we can see how the Russians were establishing the Russian flag in the most northern part of the settlement. I'll remind you that several days ago, the pro-Ukrainian sources reported that Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to restore control over the settlement by the name of Dnieproenergia. And Ukrainians reported that they managed to do this 2 weeks ago, but without any proofs, of course, without any videos or geolocations that can confirm this. And now the Russians decided to, let's say, confirm their position that they control the settlement, and the Russians published this video. This is fresh video that took place probably during these days, maybe yesterday, maybe today in the morning. And based on this video, we just removed the contested area from this territory. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 16th of April of 2025, and this is, for example, the Ukrainian report of Deep State, where they show that this territory is in the gray zone. And now we have no doubts that most likely Ukraine attack that probably took place several days ago was repelled by the Russians completely, and the Russians save control over the settlement, and the Russians have strong positions in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation around the settlement of Bogatyr, where the Russians probably are about to begin another major offensive operation. As for now, the settlement is under very heavy fire. The Russians are bombing and attacking this village with all calibers they have, with artillery, with flamethrower systems, with aviation, with drones. So the Ukrainians suffer losses, and as for now, the Ukrainians are concentrated just on one thing. They're trying to evacuate as many as possible vehicles, tanks, infantry, soldiers from this direction towards more reliable positions. The Russians control this territory completely with FPV drones, and if the Russians see anything on the ground, see anything which is moving from one settlement to another, the Russians try to destroy it as soon as possible. So there are hundreds of drones, and I'm not even sure what the Ukrainians are planning to do with this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Novopavlovka direction, where the Russians, according to information we have, managed to improve their positions during the previous 24 hours, and this information today was provided us by the pro-Ukrainian mappers. So these are approximately the changes according to pro-Ukrainian sources, but if you take a look at our map, you're gonna see that most of these territories were colored in the Russian favor several days or even weeks ago based on the geolocations that were provided. Another important piece of news is coming from the territory of the settlement by the name of Preobrazhenka. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of active actions, the units of the Group of Forces Center managed to establish complete control over the settlement. Once again, we haven't changed anything because according to geolocations, this village was captured by the Russians probably several weeks ago during the Russian, let's say, breakthrough operation, when they managed to reach almost the border between the Dnipro and the Donetsk regions. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kibban Bitska direction, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. Today we got lots of icons and lots of videos from this area. First of all, the Russians published the video that confirms Russian control over the settlement by the name of Kalinova. Here we can see how the Russian stormtroopers were clearing trenches positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of the settlement. Based on this video, we haven't adjusted anything because yesterday the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed that the village of Kalinova was taken by the Russians and cleared completely. Today the Russians just provided us some video that confirmed this as well. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to secure the settlement by the name of Valentynka, and the Russians published this video from the territory of this settlement. Here we can see two Russian soldiers that raised two flags. One of the flags is the Russian flag and the second flag is the flag of the unit that was clearing and attacking the territory of the settlement of Valentynka. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map and we have colored everything to the south. Most likely tomorrow the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information. Furthermore, as you can see, the Russians continue advancing in the northern direction, and the Russians managed to outflank the settlement of Sukhaya Balka from the west. So based on this configuration of the line of combat contact and the configuration of this front line, we believe that this upcoming night between the 17th and the 18th of April, the Ukrainians will begin retreating towards more reliable positions in the northern and the northwestern direction, trying to escape this possible cauldron, because we see that the Russians are about to encircle the Ukrainians, because during the previous days we got reports that the Russians managed to cut this, let's say, complex network of the fortifications in two, and we see that the Russians during the previous days also improved their positions to the west of the settlement of Leonidovka. If the Russians are able to improve their positions for another, let's say, kilometer in the northern direction along the southern roads of attack like this, and if the Russians are able to improve their positions in the western direction from the settlement of Leonidovka for another kilometer as well, this is going to be done a cauldron for the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of Sukhaya Balka. So we see that the Ukrainians have no chances to control this territory. Now they need to retreat as soon as possible with the purpose to save, let's say, soldiers and to try to stabilize the situation along the line between the settlements by the name of Alexandropol, Zarya and Romanovka. And most likely the Ukrainians will be able to do this, but most likely just for several weeks, and then this defense line will collapse as well, and the Russians will continue moving further in the direction of Kibban Bitska reservoir. Furthermore, according to several pro-Russian resources, these pockets between the settlements of Kalinova and Panteleimonovka was also secured by the Russians today. So several pro-Russian resources reported that this salient was cut by the Russians by the end of the 17th of April. So as you can see, the Russians managed to maintain the lines, and most likely during the next several days we should expect Russian attempts to attack on first videos from the territory of the settlement by the name of Stara Nikolaevka and the settlement by the name of Gnatovka. So the next clashes are going to take place for this village, and this is probably the beginning of probably some disaster for the Ukrainians, some operational crisis for the armored forces of Ukraine in this area. Another important thing is that right before we started making this video, we got another geolocation that we haven't managed to add this icon in this video to map and to adjust the map because we were about to start the video, that the Russians entered the settlement of Mirolubovka. So something happened here as well. Zelensky also made his own statement regarding this offensive operation, that the Russians were using hundreds of vehicles, hundreds of tanks and vehicles. So that was the biggest offensive operation ever, and this operation we will discuss tomorrow probably when we get additional details. But there are very high chances that the eastern flank of the city of Pakovsk and Pakovsk agglomeration collapsed today by the end of the 17th of April. Something big and something very, very important happened here. We will discuss this later. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Donetsk direction, Constantine Coline, where the Russians, as you can see, continue their offensive operation completely, let's say, unstopped mode. According to information we have, the Russians indeed managed to enter the mine to the northwest of the settlement by the name of Donetsk and to dig in deeper. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians with FPV drones, and several videos, several episodes from this video were geolocated, especially this one. In this video we can see very powerful explosion, very powerful attack that took place exactly in the southern part. The Ukrainians destroyed this building, which most likely was under complete control of the Russian forces by the time the Russians attacked this territory. So the clashes for this mine has begun. The Russians are advancing. It is a very difficult battle, but we see that the Ukrainians most likely would be forced to fall back from this area in the very near future. And if Ukrainians lose control over this mine, this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of Ukrainian positions and Ukrainian lines between the settlements of Kibban Bitska, Katerinovka, and Shevchenko, Novospaska, because from this direction the Russians will obviously continue their offensive further in the direction of Kibban Bitska reserve with the purpose to cut off 522 roads and to cut the Ukrainians in the southern pocket from normal and stable supply and support. At the same time, another group of Russian forces continue advancing in the northern direction from the settlement of Druzhba, trying to shorten the distance to the settlement by the name of Delievka. There are very heavy clashes in this area. The Russians are using, let's say, artillery of all calibers they have, including the tall flamethrower systems. In this video we can see how the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine were burning out by the Russian units. So very heavy clashes in this direction. As for now, the Ukrainians are holding their lines. We can't say that Ukrainian positions in Ukrainian defense collapse. We see that Ukrainians, as for now, as for the end of the 17th of April, show fierce resistance. As for the city of Chasiv Yar, nothing special happened in this area. The same thing about the Sivas direction. Just several videos were published by the Russian units from the Serebryanka forest, and this is not the first video, by the way, from this direction published by this unit. In this video we can see another massive artillery strike with the use of tall flamethrower systems on the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, basically along Seversky Donetsk river. So the Russians are getting closer and closer to this position, trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory towards the settlement of Grigorovka and Serebryanka. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Leman direction, where the Russians managed to improve their positions once again. According to different mappers, according to neutral mappers, and according to pro-Russian resources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to take the village of Novo and Pincers from the south and from the north. Furthermore, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the eastern part of the settlement of Novomikhailivka, and the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in the fields between the settlements of Novolubovka and Grekovka. We see that the Russians are advancing, and we see that this offensive is gaining momentum, and we see that Ukrainians can't stabilize the situation, and it's very difficult even to project what is going to be next when talking about the Ukrainian defense and Ukrainian, let's say, idea what exactly they're going to do with this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Koopins direction, where the Russians continue offensive operations. Several Russian resources reported that they managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Kondrashovka, Tishenkovka, and that currently the clashes are taking place for the northwestern outskirts of the settlement of Koopins. So the Russians, some very more or less, let's say, reliable resources from the Russian side are saying that the Russians are trying to attack and to enter the city of Koopins from the northwest. Obviously, if this information is correct and if we are gonna get some proofs about this is going to be also another disaster for the armored force Ukraine in this area, and this will force the Ukrainians to begin, let's say, retreating from this direction. Furthermore, I'll remind you that according to several pro-Ukrainian resources, the Russians are trying to concentrate right now additional and lots of forces in the vicinity of the settlement of Sinkovka on the territory of the village of Kruglakovka. So the Russians are concentrating their forces here, and for example, if we combine these two updates about Russian offensive in the northwestern part and Russian concentration of forces in the vicinity of Sinkovka, we see that maybe the Russians are planning to cross the river Voskol and to begin offensive operation in the southern part of the city of Koopinsk, which sooner or later will lead to encirclement of this town and this agglomeration. So once again, something is happening right now on the territory of France. Ukrainians came there with this delegation and they have lots of talks for a reason, obviously, and obviously they want some security guarantees. Maybe they want security guarantees for themselves. Let's say they will, accept Russian demands, but they need to have guarantees that if they have just 80,000 army on the territory of Ukraine, they want to be sure that in 10 or 20 years the Russians will not begin another, war on the territory of Ukraine. So maybe something like this is happening right now. But also I'll remind you that yesterday the Ukrainians adopted the mobilization law, the extended mobilization and the extended martial law for another 90 days. So something interesting is happening right now behind the scene. We just can project, just speculate, nothing more. And now let's move to the Sumo direction, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. And according to information we have, the Russians by the end of the 17th of April of 2025 secured the territory of the church. So the church was taken by the Russians. As you can see, the church complex was damaged. The church complex wasn't reduced to ruins as, this village of Marinka or the city of Volchansk. Obviously, the Russians will be able to restore this complex, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back, but some sources reported that several groups of the armored forces of Ukraine were caught by the Russians on the territory of the basements and below the surface in different facilities of this church. So the situation here is very difficult as well. As for the northern part of Yunakivka direction, Sumo direction, as you can see, we haven't received anything special. The Russians most likely are regrouping in this area. Another important update we got today from the territory of United Kingdom. Very interesting article was published today. So according to information we have, United Kingdom announced successful testing of microwave weapons. They may be used in Ukraine. Rapid Destroyer is designed to destroy drones. London says that 2 groups of 8 drones were neutralized during the test, and more than 100 drones have already been destroyed during the test. The system was developed by a consortium led by the French defense conglomerate Thales. The new product is transported in the back of a truck and requires a lot of energy. It is noted that in the future the weapon may be used in Ukraine. So most likely this weapon will be used in Ukraine. Another important update is coming from the Washington, where according to information we have, the Russian Federation, the United States of America and Belarus voted against the resolution on United Nations cooperation with the Council of Europe. American diplomats emphasized that the anti-Russian wording used in the resolution does not contribute to achieving peace in Ukraine. The document spoke of Russian aggression, which was the reason for the no vote. Thus, the United States voted against the resolution along with Russia and Belarus. Obviously, this is something new in the world, and we see that this world order is breaking and collapsing, and most likely on the ruins of this world something new is going to grow and rise. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.